It's often referred to as the World Cup of diplomacy. Only there are no prizes or trophies when the final whistle goes. And in this instance, when the gavel lands after the final speech is said and done.
The United Nations precinct here in Manhattan will be totally transformed for high-level week. A security fortress is probably a good way of describing it due to the influx of high-level delegations that include presidents, prime ministers and even CEOs. And while the United Nations itself gets high marks for effort during this week of high-stakes diplomacy, it's not always clear what it can achieve in terms of some of the intractable issues and conflicts facing the world today.
And this expert is perfectly fair in his assessment.
This is a diplomatic circus, and you have leaders and foreign ministers rushing around, giving hundreds of speeches, having hundreds of meetings, often probably not quite sure what they're doing here, but they think it's important.
The General Assembly's theme for the 74th session, galvanizing multilateral efforts for poverty eradication, quality education, climate action and inclusion. With high-level meetings on universal health coverage, the SDGs and financing for development, the elimination of nuclear weapons among others, and the Secretary-General's Climate Action Summit.
The UN is trying to show that it is important to the fight against inequality, that it is important to the fight against climate change. And it's pressing those messages because there is a sense that in an era of populism, in an era of major social tensions, the UN isn't really speaking to people's needs.
But with the United States accusing Iran of an act of war over strikes on oil infrastructure in Saudi Arabia and long-standing difficulties in finding political compromises in Libya, Syria and elsewhere, the UN's developmental agenda could be squeezed from many fronts.
The big question that a lot of people were asking was whether President Rouhani of Iran might meet Donald Trump and might start to reconcile their differences, but after the attacks on Saudi Arabia, that now seems almost impossible. I don't think we're going to see any really big diplomatic breakthroughs at this General Assembly. I fear that the entire event will be overshadowed by the risk of war in the Persian Gulf, and Donald Trump will face a lot of very skeptical leaders when he's talking about US policy in the Middle East.
The African file will also include maiden speeches to the GA by DRC President Felix Tshisekedi and Sudan's new Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok, while the host country's leader is also one to watch. A world body under increasing pressure to deliver on the needs of the most vulnerable, but dependent on the consensus of member states who, while trumpeting the virtues of multilateralism, often fall short of its stated goals. South Africa's delegation will be led by International Relations Minister Naledi Pandor. Sherwin Bryce-Pease, SABC News, New York.